published in 1985. Blood Meridian is a classic that you don't read, you survive. Dressed in the clothing of a Western, this beautiful and terrible story of the misadventures of a young runaway in the American Southwest unravels into an American epic that explores human nature, violence, war, and at its core, the show stealer is Judge Holden, the character that I think fascinates me the most. Usually I'm not fascinated by characters, by human characters. I'm more fascinated by concepts. That's why I like Borges or Thomas Ligotti. Thomas Ligotti is my favorite type of horror because it's very abstract and philosophical. But Judge Holden is an embodiment of it. And since this book was published, Harold Bloom included it into his Western canon. His analysis of Judge Holden, it's very interesting, but it didn't exhaust the discussion at all. And the conversation, I think, will keep going. The conversation surrounding Judge Holden will keep going through eternity, I think. Why do I think that? Because, as we shall see today, we shall apply Blaga's Metaphysics of Mystery. In case you don't know what's happening in this video, hi, I'm Stefan Baciu. You're watching the Nether Street Blues YouTube channel where we discuss literature that lingers. This is actually the second video in my Nether Strand series, where I'm currently doing a connecting and comparative analysis of Cormac McCarthy, one of America's greatest contemporary novelists, and Lucian Blaga, Romania's foremost philosopher-poet or poet-philosopher. And if you are like me and read Blood Meridian and are fascinated by the book, no analysis of the book or of Judge Holden will ever satisfy you. And probably this video won't satisfy you as well, at least I hope so, in a sense. But it will definitely scratch an itch. It will scratch that itch because at the core of Blood Meridian is mystery. And as we shall see in this video, Blaga's philosophical system lends very well to analyze this book. Now, before we move on, thank you very much for watching. I thank everybody who's subscribed and left me those wonderful comments. Be sure to like, subscribe, turn on that bell notifications button, check out my Substack. And now that we have this little housework out of the way, let's get on. Blaga describes himself as the first philosopher of mystery. He does that in one of his later lectures in around 1954, delivered at the University of Cluj. And you know, when I read that statement, I was a bit taken aback, because I thought of Rudolf Otto's The Idea of the Holy, Das Heilige, per its original title, which was published in 1917, 2 years before Blaga published his first collection of poems called Poemele Luminii, the Poems of Light. And it's interesting because there are hints of his system in the very first poem of the very first volume, which is called in Romanian Eu nu strivesc corola de minune a lumii, which in English it would translate as I do not squash the corolla of wonders of the world. Corolla, for those of you that do not know this term, it means the multitude of petals of a flower. That's what corolla means. And basically, Blaga centers his whole philosophy around mystery. Mystery is the permeating, not the permeating, it's immanent in human existence. It what permeates reality, but it's also the ultimate goal of humanity that they will never reach. And you know, some of you might already be thinking of parallels with apophatic theology or negative theology, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let's get back to Judge Holden and Blood Meridian and why I'm going to apply this system in analyzing Judge Holden. Because I think it lends quite well to a Holden inquiry. Let's look at the character. We know a lot about him. We know many facts about Judge Holden. He's a great dancer. He's proficient in war and combat. He's well learned. He has an appetite for learning. He carries notebooks in which he draws and notes facts. He speaks many languages. He wants to learn. He's constantly absorbing. But at the end, you know, he remains a mystery for us. And I know that people have called him a personification of war, and I get that because, yeah, obviously all trades, they can be utilized towards war. You know, most of the technology that we're using, you know, even the internet and drones, AI, everything before it had civilian application was used, you know, in theaters of combat. And this goes way back, you know, like engineering in the Roman Empire developed for military purposes. Descartes, for example, Leonardo da Vinci, they were military advisors. They worked as military advisors. I'm not that sure about Leonardo da Vinci. I might be thinking about Assassin's Creed, the games, but I'm definitely right on Descartes. You can double check me on that. We can say that Judge Holden is a personification of war, but if you're watching this video, you're not satisfied with this explanation. You're not satisfied with the fact that, you know, many people have called Judge Holden an archon, because there is something at his core which is unreachable. And Blaga basically says, you know, there's something at the bottom of all reality that is unreachable. And humans will never reach it. Why? Why does Blaga say that? Because at the center of all his metaphysics, there is this thing, I don't know how to describe it, called the Great Anonymous. A self-concealing, unknowable, ultimate reality actor. You know, like we can't really, you know, say many things about the Great Anonymous, because he wouldn't be the Great Anonymous, he would be the Little Anonymous. That was a stupid joke. But yeah, I know that there's that thing which, you know, there is another, and we're moving onto another key aspect of Blaga's metaphysics of mystery, namely the reason why humans cannot know the Great Anonymous, and even, you know, like mystery itself, you know. Because there is a limit. A limit in Romanian, Blaga called it cenzură transcendentală. I've seen it translated as divine censorship and transcendental censorship. I guess both work. Either way, there's this limit. And humans, try as they might, they will never be able to pierce the ultimate reality of mystery. You know, like they will be able to, you know, pursue and try to conquer, to colonize mystery. They might even, you know, like come back with some treasures, come back with more knowledge, but all the knowledge that they get from mystery, you know, that they extract from mystery, it just shows to us how much we don't know. And you have to take into account the time when Blaga was writing. He was writing at the time when Einstein's theory of relativity was something new, something fresh. there were a lot of changes in everything. People, I think, were still reeling from Charles Darwin evolutionary hypothesis, and it was basically a time when everything goes. But I think the greatest impact at the time, the thing that impacted Blaga the most, because it appears, referenced a lot, was Einstein's theory of relativity. And there is this philosopher called Thomas S. Kuhn. He wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, but he mainly talks about physics in that book. And in The Structure of Scientific Revolution, Thomas Kuhn basically says that, what's really strange is that, for Newtonian physics, with the Newtonian physics, you accumulate more and more information using a system, and then you go in, you end up with the theory of relativity that basically, does away with the Newtonian system as it was understood at the time. And that's basically how Blaga's mystery metaphysics work. And for Blaga, the reason why there's this transcendental censorship, he says that, if there wasn't, humans, they might compete with the great anonymous in terms of centrality in the universe, but at the same time, they would lose we would lose our humanity, we would lose our wonder, our excitement, and even though we'd be all-knowing and all-power, we'd be bored and depressed. And that's why there is this divine censorship. But, as with any limit, there are obviously going to be people that will rebel against it. Look at kids. You tell them not to do a thing and they will do it. Sometimes, if you don't tell them not to do, they might ignore that thing altogether and forget about it. But if you tell them no, they'll go towards that, to break that rule that you've imposed upon them. I'm talking about my son here. Yeah. For Blaga, human beings are creatures that live within the horizon of mystery. Within that horizon of mystery, so, we can imagine mystery as the sky that's above us. But, not everything in life is mysterious. We obviously have empirical, easily knowable facts that are not mysterious. They might hide a mysterious reality, but they're not mysterious in themselves. Blaga employs two types of knowing, There's the paradisiacal knowledge. Paradisiacal knowledge, basically, we look at an object. So with paradisiacal knowledge, we look at an object and it's the way it reveals himself to us, we take it for granted. We just accept the facts, note them down, and try to live our lives, in accordance with said facts. We don't go into the deeper reality. That's paradisiacal knowledge, and according to Blaga, it's not very interesting because it's also what animals use. But for human beings that are fascinated with the mystery, we look at an object and we don't look only at the things we see and take them at face values. We ask why. We ask why does this X phenomenon happen the way it is, and we pierce it, and we end up knowing, okay, so it's because of that cause, it's because of cause A. What causes cause A? It's cause B, and so on and so forth. And it will never reach it. I'm not giving examples because you can think of examples. That's how science works. And let's come back to Judge Holden and apply these categories to him. Obviously, he rebels against this divine censorship. He rebels because he actually says whatever exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. He hates mystery. He wants to be suzerain of the earth by knowing everything. But it's also another interesting fact, and I think that's why he's been called an archon or the demiurge. He notes or draws, artifacts and basically knows them, and then he destroys those artifacts or those fossils. He basically wants to be the only keeper of that key. He wants knowledge for himself, but also he wants to increase mystery in a sense. Maybe he doesn't want to increase mystery, but he unwittingly increases mystery. It's very interesting that Judge Holden's project, which is Luciferic, and if you're wondering why, and that's Blaga's term, why Blaga used Luciferic knowledge, it was just a stylistical thing. He was just being an edgelord. He wasn't really, he actually said that it's just because he was also a poet and he liked, you know, like, I think the sound of it, but also, and Blaga says this exactly, almost word for word. He says, the Luciferic project is tragic because after infinite attempts to conquer mystery, human beings will always fail. Why? Because of said divine censorship. Judge Holden obviously doesn't care about that divine censorship. He doesn't know about it, he hasn't read Blaga, and even if he read it, he would take it as a challenge. But now let's look at Judge Holden. You know, let's analyze him, let's try to pierce his mystery. And if we try to pierce his mystery, using Blaga's category, using Luciferic knowledge, trying to conquer, you know, like that, that unknowable core of what Holden is, you know, like, let's say, you know, like, Judge Holden is that exactly. As you know, this is the case with, you know, like, other works of fiction, like, let's say 1984, when, you know, like, the parallels are pretty on the nose. Judge Holden is not like that. Why? Because he actually describes, or sorry, he doesn't describe, he's a symbol. He is a symbol of a very mysterious reality. The reality of war, of conquest. You know, his a personification might not be the best term. I think he's a symbol of war, or a metaphor of war. And why am I using metaphor? Metaphor is also a Blagian term. And for Blaga, metaphors, works of art in general, are an attempt to reveal mystery. But being, you know, in the whole system, any attempt to reveal mystery just end up with more mystery. Now, before we finish this video, keep that idea of mystery in mind, and let's go back to apophatic theology, which I mentioned towards the beginning of this video. Also known as negative theology, it's the cornerstone of mystical Christian Orthodox thought. It was first posited by Pseudo-Dionysius, expanded by many church fathers such as Saint Gregory of Nyssa and Saint Gregory Palamas. I'm not gonna go into details. This is not the place for this kind of discussion. There are better resources on YouTube. I might leave a link in the description, so be sure to follow to check that out. With negative theology, we can't know what God is. We can only know what He isn't. We know that He is not mortal, He is not constrained by time and space, He is not evil, so on and so forth. God is this wholly other from humans, and He's also this inexhaustible well of mystery, which we will never be able to comprehend as holy and as saintly as we can get, you know, even in the afterlife. Saint Gregory of Nyssa, as quoted by Callistus Ware in the Orthodox Way, very good introductory book to Eastern Orthodox theology, if you want to check that out. Saint Gregory of Nyssa says that those in paradise will have the chance to experience the unfolding of God's nature throughout eternity. There will be a constant revelation, and it's a beautiful thought. It's like when you love somebody and you discover a new facet of them, and it goes on through eternity. And why did I mention that? Because this is how mystery works for Blaga. Blaga was influenced by apophatic theology, but his system diverged from it, and we will explore how it diverged through later videos especially. But coming back to the judge and him as a character, and not as a character but as a cultural artifact, as a metaphor, this is being compared to like the Schopenhauerian will, the Gnostic demiurge or archons. That's the thing, you can talk about the judge forever because he contains that mystery, because he is a metaphor in the Blagian sense, and obviously he is a personification in a sense of war. He is a metaphor for war and our warlike tendencies. But what does that points us in looking at it through the lens of the metaphysics of mystery, employing the tools that I've only provided in this video, is that war itself is mysterious. Our warlike tendencies, they're wholly other from us, because we human beings, if you look at us humans, we're very fragile creatures. We can easily be broken, we can easily be destroyed, and still we engage in war, and we build tools for war. As I said earlier, many of our greatest inventions, they were discovered or they were researched for military purposes, and that's I think the whole mystery that the judge encapsulates, that's why he will be inexhaustible. And so far he hasn't been exhausted, and since 1985 there were a lot of very intelligent people. Some of them, like you can find easily on the internet, like I can recommend Ian Katanach of Right Conscious, and there's also my friend Tadeusz Thomas, who I'll link in the description, who recently wrote a very interesting essay on the morality of the judge, on his moral system, actually. Very interesting. I won't spoil it for you. And we can talk about the judge, and I could talk about the judge for hours. And still there will be more and more to talk. Why? Because, what does the judge say? War is God. And in apophatic theology, God is unknowable. So in a sense, war is unknowable. And it is. We don't know exactly how we can achieve everlasting peace. Like we have to resort to these mystical ideas of, apocalypses and revelations. So yeah, the judge shall remain this holy other, a competitor to Blaga's great Anonymous, a rebel against the divine censorship. And that's something that's within all of us, and it's something that we don't understand today, and even though we will research, we might never understand it. And if we understand something, we will realize, according to Blaga, there's so much that we don't know around this topic of war, of human destruction. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you've subscribed. Thank you all who've left me those wonderful comments in the previous video. There were some very interesting but short discussions, very illuminated. I'm grateful for your feedback. Please please let me know if I can do anything to improve your viewing experience. Your support matters a lot to me. As I said, leave me comments of any kind. I really, as I said, previously, leave me any comments. I enjoy reading them. I've had some very interesting discussions with some of you guys. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on that bell notifications button. Every little bit helps. And if you want to check more of my work and also basically receive like the companion essay to this video, check out my Substack. And if you want to hear more literature that lingers, stay tuned, buy me a coffee. As I said, grateful for all your support, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm Stefan Baciu of Nether Street Blues, and keep reading literature that lingers. Thank you.